There really isn't, and that's something we're really proud of at Conciliation Court, because some of the other agencies throughout the country will limit it to 2 or 3 hours, and either they agree or they don't agree.
That seems to make a difference too. Do the people feel, when I've seen mediation done sometimes in the courts, the people feel, you know, I was sort of forced to be here, and you know, as I'm a mediator, and the people sort of voluntarily come to me. Are these people, I mean, does it work that way, that does it make a difference that they feel that they sort of have to go? Or?
They are court-ordered for the most part. We do some voluntary mediation, but for the most part, people are court-ordered if they have some kind of difference. If they disagree, the court will send them to mediation as an option to try and resolve it rather than going through court. And I think a lot of people don't want to be there just because it is court-ordered, but by the time they're finished, people are usually happy with our services. Not everybody, but most.
Do you find same things to find that when doing mediation, the people would come in arms crossed, angry, and then you could sort of, as they left it, they were happier with the result?
I think once people realize that they're the ones that are making the decision, and that the mediators are not going to twist arms or make them agree with something they're not comfortable with. Is
this all pre-divorce cases, or do you also deal with cases that are post-judgment?
We do pre-decree, post-decree cases, as well as never married parents. A large portion of the population we serve are never married parents.
How do they get to you if there's no divorce action pending?
Well, they're called paternity actions, and so someone will file for paternity to be established, and then they will want to have custody and parenting time arrangements for their kids as well.
What in a situation is you had a situation where the couple, which you're seeing now, I mean, we've looked at some of the statistics, and they're more, the divorce rate's going down, but the marriage rate is also going down, and I see fairly frequently now couples who've never gotten married to have a child,
right, and
then there's no paternity issues at all, but there are issues here in terms of parenting and how they're going to do that. Does that how does that work? Will you do those kind of cases also, or not?
Yes, that's the never married population that we serve. Those are the paternity cases.
But so it would have to be brought as a paternity action. But if they acknowledge paternity, would they still be up to you or not?
Well, in order to serve the people that come to us, there has to be some kind of a court file. So there has to be a paternity action, or there has to be a divorce action.
But there really is no, in Arizona, I think there is an action for sort of just doing parenting time without.
Right. If people never file to have paternity established, then they can't come through our office.
But if they had paternity established and do that, they couldn't do that. I mean, it's probably a little bit of a gap in the system, because there are more and more of those. We're also seeing, given what's happened in California and Massachusetts, more and more marriages, same-sex marriages at all. Do you deal with those kind of cases at all?
We do not. We have not had cases that we have dealt with same-sex marriage.
So, all right. You talked a little bit about going to court. Which cases would sort of go to court, and which cases would go to Conciliation Court?
Well, about a third of the cases that we see, just about a third of the cases, the divorce cases that go through the court system. And that is because we just work with cases where children are involved, and for the divorces, people do not have children. But most of the people that have children, unless they settle between themselves or through their attorneys, they'll come through our office for mediation. And if they can't agree, then they can use the court system to resolve their differences.
Before I forget, and I do this periodically, I want to remind you that we're talking to Grace Hawkins, who's head of the Conciliation Court in Tucson. I'm Wally Marcus, and if you look at the bottom of your screen, you're going to see our website, and you can get more information about Grace, the Conciliation Court, future programs. You can email us with your questions and your ideas, and we look forward to hearing from you on that one. On the Conciliation Court, we talked a little bit about when you're dealing with these mediations. Do you ever deal with the children directly at that point, or do you talk to them, or do they, or just the parents?
Well, it's up to the individual mediators. We usually don't try and involve the children into the mediation process, because we find it's best to try and keep the kids out of the conflict. We will with older children, and if both parents agree, and if the mediator thinks that it's going to be helpful to the process, then we'll involve older children into the mediation, just to kind of see if there's anything that they want to add, or feel that it's important. But we tell parents we won't do that unless you know, they are willing to hear what the child is saying. And we usually don't want to the kids if the parents are pressuring the kids in one way or another.
Okay. How many people do you think you serve on an annual basis?
Well, we serve at least, there's usually about 1,400 people that come through our office for mediation, and about 1,700 people come through for the gamut of all of our services in conciliation, mediation, evaluations, parenting coordination. And then about close to 4,000 people come through the parent education program.
That's really good. Is the current budget crunch affecting you at all? Have you had to cut back at all? Or?
Well, we are funded by court filing fees, so when people file for divorce, we get a portion of those fees, as well as when they respond, and part of paternity filings. So we're funded about 60% out of those filing fees, and then the other 40% through the county general fund. And so the hit to the county has affected us. All of the departments have had to take a little over 5% cuts, and so our office is also experiencing that.
It's hard. It's a tough time for everybody. Domestic violence is a big issue on this one. When you have a case where there's either an allegation of domestic violence or there's some, obviously when you do some screening on this in domestic violence, is there any, how does that affect the mediation or some of the work that you do, and how do you handle it?
Well, domestic violence is a very important issue, and our office really strives to be sensitive to that issue. And so all of our services, conciliation, evaluations, mediation, prior to meeting with the parties, we do a screening. And that screening is really for us to determine whether or not there has been domestic violence, whether or not there's any mental health or substance abuse issues, or other, sometimes there's physical ailments that might make our services not appropriate for someone to go through.
I hadn't thought about the drug issue, but I guess that's a big question also. How does that affect, I mean, can you still handle the cases if there's domestic? Well, especially, it seems to me sometimes you're doing mediation, the people are almost afraid to be in the same room with each other. And I remember when I did the domestic violence training, it was sort of a situation, they sort of said they only had to, you know, did your husband hit you or your spouse hit you? And they said, yeah, once, and they only had to look at them after that. They never had to hit them again. So there's not a lot of it all the time. So being in the same room sometimes can be very difficult. It can
be very difficult. And in Arizona, people can request a waiver. That they don't have to go through mediation if there has been a history of domestic violence. They can request a waiver of mediation or request that there be some protective procedures in place. And what that means is we have separate waiting rooms, we can meet with people on different days and times, or we can do what we call shuttle mediation as we go back and forth between the two parties so that they don't have to be in the same room. But a lot of times people want to, if they can advocate for themselves and they want to have a say and they want to have a part of that.
How do the lawyers fit into this process in terms of, I mean, the parties come in for the mediation. Tucson's is known for having the attorneys in the room in a lot of the cases during mediation, but the attorneys actually present during the mediation, or are they?
They are not. In our office, it is with the two parties themselves, and we do not involve the attorneys in the mediation.
So the only chance is when they get the parenting plan, they can then comment on it and do that. Does that happen often, or where you actually have a parenting plan or something, you've come to some resolution with the parties and the attorneys get involved and it changes?
Yes, the attorneys do file objections in some of the cases. It's not a high percentage, but in some of the cases that happens.
And what about the court? You said these goes back to the court. Does the court usually approve these things? Do they get turned down, or what?
It's very rare that the judges do not approve them, but it ultimately is up to the judges to approve the plans to make sure that they're in the best interest of the kids that are involved. But I would say only like 1 or 2 cases, probably in 5-10 years that I know of, the judge didn't approve the plan.
That's good. What are some of the qualifications for the people that are working in your office, or what's their training?
The clinicians that work in our office, they have master's degree in some kind of a behavioral health setting, behavioral health degree, so social work, psychologists, masters in education, so they're all professional in the behavioral health field.
And do they have ongoing training, or at this point, do you do in-house training, or they go to?
We do both. Any new mediators that we hire, we send them to a mediation training, 30 or 40-hour mediation training, depending on what's available. We also send people to in-house training, and we also send people to custody evaluation trainings if they're going to be doing custody evaluations.
And is this confidential? How's the confidentiality factor here in terms of what people say in mediation and the other sessions you have?
Yeah. Conciliation sessions and mediation are confidential. Other service that I haven't talked too much about yet is our evaluations, and that service is not confidential. People, it's a good
segue. Let's talk a little bit about evaluations.
Yeah.
And then I want to make sure we allow enough time to talk about the parenting education.
Okay. Yeah, evaluations are sometimes when a case is very difficult and has a lot